So you're looking to run or create an adventure, but you're not sure where to begin, or maybe you're just trying to find a bit of inspiration for your next session that's about to happen in like 26 minutes and you're feeling at a total loss. Wouldn't it be nice if Daggerheart had something built directly into the game that was inspirational, practical, and easy to use, and could solve so many problems? That is where environments come into play. I'll admit that when the design team first revealed environments during one of the early playtests, I was a bit skeptical. I was worried that it was going to add a bunch of crunch and clunkiness to a game that seemed like it was trying to shy away from that kind of stuff. That was at least until I got to look at the system and actually use them in play and saw the value that they bring and how they aren't slowing things down with extra mechanics, but rather that they're bringing the game world to life during exploration, combat, or social encounters. It's such a brilliant idea. I'm surprised D&D hasn't done anything like this in 5th edition. I'll stress that maybe something like this has existed in prior editions or even in different games. I'm not pretending that Daggerheart is inventing anything here if they aren't. Alright, let's talk about environments, how they work, and why I think they are so damn cool. Before we get too into anything though, I just want to thank everyone for all of the support recently. It's been just insane. So if you'd like to help me on my journey to 20,000 subscribers, I truly appreciate it. You might be surprised by just how much subscribing and clicking the like button while you're there really helps. Thanks. There's a chance that at this point you're wondering what I'm even referring to when I talk about environments. I'm not just talking about broad, vague regions like deserts or tundras or forests. Daggerheart, like most other TTRPGs, has a stat block for its enemies that explains how the creatures can attack and interact and what their motivations might be. However, they also have stat blocks for environments that do much the same thing. They provide descriptions and inspirations for small areas or can be even used to cover large swaths of land. They provide for hazards and moments of intrigue and learning and even opportunities for combat to happen. Environments create life and excitement into what can otherwise be mundane experiences, and they do so in a very familiar and seamless way. Something that I truly cannot emphasize enough, so I'll quote directly from the book here. The environment framework is meant to be inspiring and practical rather than unchangeable and prescriptive. It provides a way to organize and prepare ideas for important scenes. It can be so easy to look at these as I did and just think, wow, that's another thing to keep track of and pay attention to. But that's not the point of these at all. I like to think of these as more supporting a scene, whether it's in combat or exploration, and not something that's getting in the way. In a lot of ways, actually, they can end up making encounters play out more smoothly and naturally, or create impetus for exciting moments to happen. So to explain how these work, we are going to be using the Raging River environment since it's the one that the book uses, and for good reason, because I think it does an excellent job at showing off just how interesting and useful these can be in games. The first thing you'll see on any environment stat block will be its name, in this case, Raging River. Immediately below that, you'll also see the tier of play that this is intended for. It's important to note that the book explicitly states that you can and should adjust other environments to match the tier of play that you're looking for, and they provide some suggestions on how to do that. As a quick reminder, the tier structure in Daggerheart is as follows. Tier 1 is level 1, Tier 2 is levels 2 to 4, Tier 3 is levels 5 through 7, and Tier 4 is levels 8 through 10. Adversaries in the game also have this same tier designation that can help you as a GM get a quick, at-a-glance understanding of what level of challenge the adversary or environment as written will bring to your group. In the case of the Raging River, we can see that this is a Tier 1. Next to that on the stat block, we can see that it says Traversal. This is considered the type of environment that it is. The type designates the kind of scene that this environment best supports. Note that it's not exclusive to that, just that it was designed with traversal, for example, in mind. The game currently has 4 different types of environments. Explorations are these wondrous and mythical locations. They might have things to discover, whether that's information or even artifacts. They're designed to support exploration of areas. Next are socials, which are locations that will primarily feature interpersonal challenges. Perhaps areas where negotiations may occur, or some kind of fancy gala or ball. Traversals are typically locations that are physically dangerous. These are areas where just moving around can often be a challenge in itself. Finally, there are events. These environments are usually more defined by the action that is occurring in them rather than the physical space that they're in. They can be things like cult rituals, where the environment stat block will describe more about the ritual and what is happening than the area itself. It should be pretty clear that these types of environments presented are pretty broad and, most importantly, mix and matchable and also layerable. There's nothing to say that you can't combine the cult ritual event with the haunted city location and have 2 things going on at the same time. It's just going to make things feel even more dangerous and dynamic, so you probably want to consider that. Next we see the description, which is pretty self-explanatory. But what comes after that is a nice touch. These are labeled as impulses and represent the way that the environment influenced those within them. Places and locations don't have volition, they can't decide to do something. However, it's the people and the forces within those environments that can gravitate towards certain goals or objectives. The text describes how the raging river is rushing to carry anything within it away or drown it, and how a casino distracts and disorients people in an effort to push them toward gambling away all of their money. I find that the impulses section one of the most inspiring and intriguing elements of the block. They help me to think about what's going on in the scene, what's interesting about it, what's happening, and what are the players likely trying to get away from. It's a great part of the design that I am very happy to see. And you know what works so incredibly well with the impulses section? Any of the wonderful descriptions available through this video sponsor, DSCRYB. As you can imagine, DSCRYB has endless amounts of scenes and descriptions to make your games and environments come to life. Whether it's a barren wasteland, a forest teeming with life, or a castle dungeon, DSCRYB has exactly what you need. Combine that with their scene builder Opus to add music, sound effects, maps, and more, and you can actually have your world come to life right before your eyes. And best of all, everything on DSCRYB is free of AI. It's all made by humans. So check out my link in the description or the pinned comment below to double the length of your free trial from 2 weeks to a full month. Thanks to DSCRYB for sponsoring this video. Next we see the difficulty, and this should not be surprising at this point. The difficulty here represents the number that needs to be rolled to overcome most of the challenges in the block itself, unless otherwise specified in a particular action. This is exactly the same for how it works with adversaries. Just below that, we see a list of potential adversaries. This can be really great for helping to quickly prepare if you're just trying to include some quote-unquote typical creatures in an area. What I particularly like though is that they've not only future-proofed it in a sense, but they've also made it really easy to know what you can add. In the Raging River block, for example, we see that it says beasts, and then includes a list saying bear and glass snake. After that, it says jagged knife bandits and includes all of those as well. What's nice about this is that as more beast and bandit types get added to the game, it can help make it even easier to know what to add. And I know that some people are going to say, well, you can just add whatever you want, and of course you can. They even describe the blocks as not being prescriptive, but that's not really the point that I'm getting at. You're using the stat block presumably because you want it to help take some of the load off, and small touches like this go a long way to making a GM's life a lot easier. Finally, we have the actual features themselves, and these are really the meat of the blocks. This is where we learn exactly what the environment is capable of and what challenges it will throw at our players. Just like with adversaries, there are 3 types of features here: actions, reactions, and passives. Passives, like the name suggests, are passive. They're always happening in the background. In the case of the Raging River, we see that it has the Dangerous Crossing passive, which initiates a countdown when the players arrive at the location. Countdowns can tick up or down depending on what players roll and whether or not they succeed or fail on checks, and typically when it reaches the bottom, the players will have accomplished their goal. There's a lot more we can go into about countdowns, but that's probably a discussion for another video. With Dangerous Crossing, we can see that it requires the party to successfully complete a countdown when trying to cross the river. Any player that fails with fear will automatically trigger the undertow action without requiring the GM to spend a fear to activate it. This then naturally brings us to the undertow action. The way this works is that when it triggers, a PC becomes caught in the undertow and must make an agility reaction roll. On a failure, they take some damage, gain the vulnerable condition until they get out of the river, and are swept away a close distance down the river. But even on a success, they still mark a stress. This represents the challenge of dealing with this kind of environment. Even when things go well, it can still be difficult and exhausting, which requires the character to still mark a stress. The final action in the Raging River block is Patient Hunter. This requires the GM to spend a fear to summon a glass snake within close range of a chosen player, and they get to immediately take the spotlight and use their Spinning Serpent action, which is an ability that can target multiple players simultaneously, making it potentially very dangerous and highlights the hazard that crossing the river can be. There's a few things to note in regards to these actions. Firstly, these are not things that just randomly happen. Like, out of nowhere, a glass snake appears and just starts attacking the party, or you just arbitrarily decide to invoke the undertow action and sweep some players away. Remember, just about everything in Daggerheart is reactionary. That is to say that the things you do are very often the immediate consequences of decisions or actions that your players have taken. Environments are under the GM's control, which means that they follow all of the same activations rule that apply to adversaries, which are also under the GM's control. This means that in order for the GM to activate an environment feature, the players must fail an action roll with fear, or the situation is such that it would be appropriate for the GM to spend a fear and take the spotlight. There are some other scenarios, but these are by far the most common ones, and it's important to keep in mind that the players have bought into this exchange. They understand that things can happen and change with every roll. It's part of the conceit of the game. The other thing that's important to mention that you may have noticed is that under each feature, there is some italicized text that asks a question. This isn't necessarily intended to be something that you directly post to players, but rather something that you consider when you're planning a session. In Dangerous Crossing, it asks if the players have crossed rivers before. Are any characters particularly afraid of drowning or even swimming? These are interesting questions to, at the very least, consider to spark some creativity or imagination. Undertow asks what trinkets or baubles may lie at the bottom of the water or what predators might be there. Something as simple as this can help you to think about and flesh your world out even more. Maybe a player being ripped through the tide happens to catch a glimpse of some shinies on the floor of the riverbed, which may cause him to intentionally try and dive down, which then creates an entirely new scene with players creatively trying to manage the waters. Or perhaps they see the outline of some menacing sea life looking to snap up anything that approaches. These are all the kinds of things that help so much in these moments when you want to have sessions that are a bit more alive and engaged, and not just like, oh, you roll the 12, you make it across. To finish up here, there's a few things that I particularly like about the environment stat blocks. The main and obvious one, and something that I've mentioned a few times, is that they make the world come alive in such a simple but effective way. Exploration is often considered one of the hardest pillars of most TTRPGs to get right, because there's rarely many, if any, rules to reference to keep things feeling tight and smooth. And you don't even have the conversational back and forth that you might have during a social encounter. A lot of overland travel even ends up getting hand-waved until there's a combat or some major impasse like a cliffside, and then it's often just a question of what spell or items does the group have to navigate it. And it should be noted that these blocks don't take away that. If anything, they enhance it. They make it so that cliffside ascent actually has some purpose and consequences and stakes. It makes it so that it's more than just a simple check, and I love that. The second thing that I really like is that it makes game prep not just easier, but more engaging. I'll admit that I'm not the world's most creative person. I'll get into grooves now and again, but mostly it's just not an area that I excel at. But when I look at these and it's asking me a question, I feel so much more inspired and prepared and creative. It can be so overwhelming to just think, alright, I need something to make this travel moment or this cult ritual exciting, and then have to come up with that entire thing by yourself. It's hard, and things like this help to alleviate that stress in a major way. With these, you can just scan through the blocks, go through the questions, and in a few minutes, you've got a whole challenge prepared, and it's also one that's mechanically deep and feels fair and adds to the danger of the moment as well. It's liberating. It's honestly kind of hard to describe. The final thing I wanted to touch on that I really like about environment stat blocks are the scalability and potential to layer. When you read a 5e module, very often dungeons will give you some brief general descriptions of the surroundings. Maybe cavern ceilings are 15 feet high and there's dim light in all directions, or water is rushing, making it so it's harder to hear anything. These are always great and helpful with those environments and can make them stand out a bit more and present some unique challenges. The environment stat blocks, though, are just like 1,000 times better because they create so much more to engage with and are things that actually provide feedback. But even more than that, they don't need to be this isolated thing, as you can often just apply the effects of the environment to either an enormous sprawling area or even just keep it confined to a smaller one. Maybe that raging river is actually part of a cave network. Maybe the effects of the hallowed temple can just run through an entire cave network. The Burning Heart of the Woods environment is a great example of a large-scale environment that could be suitable to a massive area or even a much smaller one. The point is that these are designed to be flexible and scalable, which makes them infinitely usable. Combine that with layering options by stacking 2 or more of these together, and you've got some crazy stuff cooking. Sadly, there's not a ton of environments right now. There's only 19 in the core rulebook. I am absolutely positive that this will be expanded as subsequent books are released though. Fortunately, like I mentioned, they're very easy to adapt and change to suit your specific needs, even if you don't see an environment that perfectly overlaps with what you want. And if anything else, it can give you ideas for actions and features that feel reasonable or fair in different tiers of play, and with different kinds of environments, so you could even create your own without too much effort by modeling it after the ones in the book. Now, I know that there are going to be a good amount of people who are going to get hung up on what looks to be like a ton of management or disruption, and while there certainly is a slight learning curve, it's not any more challenging than running a monster. Imagine having to come up with your monsters on the spot every single time you went to play D&D. That's kind of the problem that these are solving, just with the environment. These just passively run in the background in most cases. It's definitely a lot easier to utilize them than you might expect, because it's less about managing and breaking up play and more about injecting the scene with action and providing your players with opportunities to shine and overcome challenges in a natural way. Let me know your thoughts on environment stat blocks in the comments. Thank you again to all of my patrons, you guys are incredible. Check out some of my other videos, but otherwise, take care.